Hello, we are on to the last week of the book of 1 Peter. You may have journeyed with us on a lot of this, and you may have thought, well, surely last week was the last week because we finished kind of going through our in-depth one. But what Steve and I were talking about is we'd love the opportunity this week just to do a bit of a summary through the book. So it shouldn't be any longer than normal. But I think we're just aware there is so much in this book that you can pull out, and we just wanted to spend this time in this session just to pick out 4 things that we think are just really key and really important. And as I go through the 4, we'll just pick out a few verses that just really highlight that point. So I'll read them on each point, if that makes sense. So the first couple of verses, 1 Peter 1, verses 14 to 16. And it says this: as obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. And this is one of the main things Peter is trying to bring out throughout this book. He's trying to get Christians then and forever afterwards, which includes us right now, to really grab hold of this idea that we are called to be holy. We can live a holy life because of who Jesus is, because of what he did for us, and because he calls us to live not for ourselves, but for him. We can live this holy life. And the difference is that we will get things wrong. So he's calling us to a holy life, but as I say, the difference is we aren't going to get everything right. Christ's sacrifice and his grace is why we can live this holy life, a different way to God's holiness, but he calls us to live this way, to live as holy people, to live, as it says in those verses, as his children, being obedient in how we live. And it is a hard thing to live up to, even though we know our holy life is going to be different to God's holy life, because God knows we're going to get it wrong. God knows we are not going to be perfect and doesn't put that expectation on us, but it doesn't mean that makes it easy. For me, this is something I strive for every day. And I know I'm not going to get it right every day, but to wake up and pray something along the lines of, God, what are you asking of me today? Help me be who you've called me to be today. To wake up and live every day afresh, not dwelling on what's gone on before, not dwelling on what we got wrong yesterday, but starting anew with him every day, telling him every day as perhaps we wake up or when we go to bed, Lord, I'm sorry for that I got wrong today, or I'm sorry for that I got wrong yesterday if we're doing it in the morning. God, help me today to be who you've called me to be this holy person today. And also in that, be honest with God about where we're at, where we're starting our day at. We may be in a great place, we may not be in a great place, we may be somewhere in between the two, but be honest with him so he can help us live that holy life that he's called us to every day and in that day, in that moment. So that's the first point. Next point, 1 Peter 2, verses 9 to 10. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And this again is something Peter really wants us to grab hold of, and he comes back to at various points throughout this whole book of grabbing a hold of our identity, of who we are. The words he uses here, what an encouragement they are of stepping into what he says our true identity is. We're chosen, we're a royal priesthood, a holy nation, we're God's special possession, we're people of God. Some of these phrases are ideas of a collective, and some are things that we can look at as an individual. We need to see that our journey of faith with God is not just about us living a separate life away from everyone, but that Peter here is encouraging us to live a life with others in community. And what is that community? It's called the church, God's church. And it's a place where we can encourage, where we can support, where we can build up one another and encourage one another to keep walking with him. Yes, as the church we get it wrong so many times. Why? Because we're human as well. But actually God sees that we need each other. We can't do this on our own, and Peter is trying to encourage us in that. That is how God created us to be. And however you feel about yourself today, as you're reading this, or any day, however you feel about yourself, we can have this identity that Peter has set out here, that God calls us to, that God says over every single one of us. But we've got to choose that identity. We've got to choose to live having this identity. People can't just come and do church at you. You need to be a part of it. You need to be active in that community. And that means seeing yourself in this way, seeing yourself as chosen, as royal, as loved, as special to God. It is our and every single one of us choice to see ourselves that way, to see ourselves in the way God has made us to be. And when our identity is assumed as that which God says, rather than what the world says to us, then we can see ourselves, our purpose, our lives in such a different way. Instead of me choosing life or you choosing life based on me or based on you and how much I see things. So where I'm saying I, this would be you saying I. So instead of me choosing my life based on me and how I see things, I am choosing my life based on what God says and how God sees things. Wow, what a perspective change that is. And what a perspective change that could not be a better way for us to live. Me not seeing life my way, but me seeing life God's way. You seeing life not your way, but you seeing life God's way. Wow, what a perspective change. If we take on this identity, if we see ourselves this way, it will help to give us that perspective, not living for me, but living for God and how he sees me. So that's point 2. Point 3, 1 Peter 3, verses 8 and 9. Finally, as much as he says finally, there is another 2 chapters after this. But anyway, finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. And throughout the book, a bit before this and a bit after this, Peter talks about different types of people and how they should live. He talks about the different roles that we each may fulfill or that we may have in our lives, maybe in different seasons or throughout our whole lives. But here he's giving this general call to all of us who are Christians, that we should love one another, that we should be humble, that we should be compassionate, we should be like-minded, and this massive idea of repaying evil with blessing. And alongside all of this, he also encourages us on how we should live with those who are not yet believers, as well as how we should live with those who are believers. This is a unified call in these few verses. Whether you identify with everything else around this that he talks on or not, in terms of whether it's a role or a person or a type of person that you are, this is for all Christians. That he's telling us to live united in a unified way, set apart. There is a higher expectation for us to live by, because we're living for God and not for self, as we've said in that point that we've just made on the idea of who our identity is and choosing to live that way. Peter knows the temptations of the world, and he knows the persecutions thrown at Christians, that they were facing then, but that we will face now. And Christians between us and still to come will also face. He knows how attractive the other option looks. He knows how easier that path looks. But what he's saying here is, don't choose the easy way. Don't choose a way that would be the obvious reaction or response. We need to live how God wants us to live. Peter is really real throughout this book, as he knows living this way is going to cost people, is going to cause persecution, is going to cause suffering. But again and again, he comes back to who we are and what we're living for. And we need to ask ourselves that. Who are we living for? Who and what gets our priority? Massive question there. Massive question there. We could just leave it with that. God should be our priority. Living for him should be our priority, and everything else should come from that. Peter really wants us to grasp this idea of what loving one another really means and what it can really look like, how living that way, living with humility, can transform not only our lives, but the lives of those around us. For us to see that we can be a blessing to others, no matter what someone has done or been to us before. And finally, point 4 is in 1 Peter 5, verses 6 to 9. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And this is towards the end. This is Peter's rallying cry for us. Again, talking on humility, calling us to a hope of endurance, encouraging us in that hope to keep going, knowing God is with us, knowing we can put our anxieties on him. Why? Because he cares for you, for me. Wow. We need to stand firm, as it says. We need to be aware of the devil's presence, of how he tries to distract us, of how he tries to pull us away. Peter's not saying again it's going to be easy. He's so real in these verses. He's not promising suffering and hardship will end anytime soon. But he's saying we need to keep going. We need to stand firm. We need to know God is near. God will never leave us. God is part of us. He's encouraging us to stay part of God's family, so we can support one another, so we can live for one another, so we can encourage one another. And most importantly, remember who we're living for. Hostility, persecution, suffering, sacrifice will all be part of our journey. I wish I could say differently, but they will all be part of our journey, and probably would be part of our journey even if we weren't living by faith. The difference, we live by faith. We see a different way. We see a different perspective. We have God with us. We have each other with us. And we know our eternity is secure, and that one day we will be with him in glory. This passage, this book, has so much truth in it and has so much encouragement in it on how we need to be living. I hope those 4 little bits I've pulled out there are bits that encourage you, inspire you, whether you've been able to look at all the detail of this passage of this book or not. I really hope they are verses that you can live by, that they will help you see that life doesn't just be all rosy when we become a Christian and when we're faithfully trying to follow God. Hopefully these verses will help you see that relationship is key. Relationship with God, not just duty to him, and relationship with each other, with other Christians. By each other is what I mean there. Relationship helps us to love. Relationship helps us to sacrifice. It helps us to live a humble and selfless life. It brings us to a place where we can embrace who God is, who he says we are, and to live out this call to be holy, not just with other Christians, but to show it to the world, to show it to those who are not yet believers in him. Let's keep remembering these words from 1 Peter. Let's keep holding on to them to encourage us, to inspire us, to help us keep going, to keep living as this set apart people and holy in God's eyes. God bless.